Right. Good morning, everybody. I'm sorry we've started a bit late with this webinar. We've had a few problems with users coming in and out and audio cutting in and out, so I think we're all sorted on all of that now. I'm going to start again, and hopefully we'll be able to move swiftly through those first slides again, and then we'll have a recording of the webinar for anybody who'd like to see the entire thing who can't stay on at the end. I have left some time at the end for some questions and answers. Do please put anything you're interested in asking into the chat interface as we go. If I can pick those up as we go, I will do, and otherwise I'll go over any questions that are in the chat interface at the end. Let's start immediately by looking at the agenda. We're going to first of all start with a quick introduction to Plan B, just so you understand our background and what our qualifications are for talking on this subject, and then look at in a broad way at disasters in the IT within, and particularly look at that with regard to the insurance industry, why you should take it seriously, what its nature is, and what can we learn from that. I'm going to use the example of the SSP Worldwide incident that happened last summer and caused so much chaos within the broker industry as a way of understanding what can go wrong and hopefully drawing a few lessons from that, and going on to talk about best practice and how you can put things in your favor when trying to mitigate risk with IT systems. I'm going to talk specifically about testing. For us, it's an absolutely fundamental part of how you manage risk and how you make sure that your IT recovery provision will work when you need it to work, and a little bit about how Plan B might be able to help you with our approach and the way we do things. And as I say at the end, we'll pick up questions and answers. So very quickly then, an introduction to Plan B. We are a specialist disaster recovery service provider. So what I mean by that is it's all we do. We aren't an IT service provider in the general sense that does a bit of DR. We are a specialist. We have been a specialist since our inception, and we've been protecting and saving our customers with a range of services for 8 or 9 years now. We do that as an independent provider, which I think is an important point we'll come to later. We have never let a customer down. We have a 100% recovery record, and we've always been able to hit our SLAs. We've done that by taking responsibility for our customers' DR solutions, managing their services so they can concentrate on their live systems and let us worry about making sure that if they need us, they'll be there and their systems will work when they need them. We do that by providing a range of services that are tailored to our customers' needs, and those can offer various service levels and various recovery points. Every day we carry out thousands of automatic test restores on customer systems, and we know in the last year, but every year we've ever been in business, that we have had to step in and help customers when they would have otherwise suffered from very damaging IT incidents. We fundamentally understand about security and service management, and we are accredited to the latest ISO standard for information security management. Obviously, that's vitally important if you're trusting another organization to hold your data and look after it. As I say, our business offerings for IT assurance go from upfront consultancy for things like requirements analysis, working out what your compliance requirements are and your appetite requirements are, then doing gap analysis against those and coming up with solutions that will meet that requirement for the long term, and managing those solutions as we go. These are the sorts of customers that I can tell you we work for. Those are just a range of customers, but proper organizations who expect their IT to work for them in all circumstances. So why should anybody take disaster recovery seriously? But most importantly, why should the insurance industry take it seriously? Well, the most obvious thing is you have an FCA obligation to identify and manage risk, and the FCA have a number of guidances on what your approach and responsibilities are under risk management with IT systems, and particularly with regard to the incident that happened with SSP last autumn. They have guidance specifically on outsourcing IT to cloud providers of the nature of SSP. So there is obviously an obligation there for compliance, but equally you have a fiduciary obligation to manage risk in your own businesses. I guess beyond that, disasters happen, and they particularly happen to IT systems. They are complicated systems which are very easy to get wrong, and the key is that they can, if they do manifest themselves, what looks like a simple problem can join with other problems and become quite an unpredictable disaster that you didn't expect to happen, and they can affect any business. Why should you be worried about that? Well, because our reliance on IT is so complete now that most businesses can't operate without their IT systems. The ramifications of that are obviously massive business and reputational damage that accrues from an IT outage, and that damage mounts up very quickly, and obviously compliance breaches follow swiftly on behind. There are all sorts of industry statistics about the percentages of businesses that go out of business following IT incidents. These are pretty widely quoted numbers, but it's a large proportion, whether you believe these particular numbers from whatever studies they come from. But it's a large proportion and therefore should be taken seriously by all organisations. In terms of IT failures, what are the common causes? It isn't acts of God. It isn't fires and floods and that sort of thing. It tends to be the simple things. It tends to be mostly human error, and it tends to be systems failing. So hardware failures and then power and communications failures next. And what really causes a disaster is when a number of those come together and multiply up and produce something unexpected. What's the nature of an IT disaster? Like all catastrophes, IT disasters are usually the result of multiple failures, as I've said before, rather than one biblical event. And when you lose your IT systems, if you just think about the last time you had an outage in your office, how very quickly everybody's work stopped, people congregate around the coffee machine, or you even have possibly had to shut up shop for the day. It will rapidly paralyze an organization. All of the normal ways of communicating and doing business and communicating amongst people within a business are taken away, and it's very hard to manually get back to doing any sort of effective business without them. When you do lose systems, the extent of the problem may be very hard to assess, and the information that you need to sort the situation out is almost always out of date, or even on the systems that you've lost. So that produces massive uncertainty, and that uncertainty and lack of clearness about what to do or how to do it means that good decision making is very difficult, and it leaves people not knowing what to do, and obviously that leads on to chaos. In our experience, obviously, what can go wrong will go wrong. It's often much harder than people have optimistically hoped that they would be able to cope with. As I say, the way issues multiply can cause crisis and quickly turn to chaos. The picture on the right is a picture from the Holborn fire of a couple of years ago, and that was a very simple outage within power and IT communications connections within a gas duct under the roads around Holborn, and that affected lots of organisations completely out of most people's control very very many organisations in that area were completely crippled for up to a week because of that. Okay, looking at why DR plans that have been made in all good faith often go wrong. I guess the number one issue is there's very little incentive to be enthusiastic about planning for a disaster. It requires money that doesn't take the organisation forward. It just simply manages risk, and therefore nobody really wants to pay for it. And that results in a tendency for people to be optimistic in their DR planning. And there are suppliers out there who will almost encourage that because simple solutions are cheaper. The honest reality is that nothing is ever as easy as you assumed it was going to be. You won't be at your best capability on your best day. You'll be at probably your most compromised capability on your worst day, and that's not a time to be trying to implement complicated plans with lots of manual requirements. And that are built like that are done optimistically, tend to be complicated, and they tend to require lots of things to go right. They're difficult to build a plan like that because they're complicated and they're impossible to maintain. And if you actually want to test them, they're ruinously costly in terms of time and money to do right. So people don't test them, and therefore they don't understand that they're inadequate. And you end up with a plan like did Gilbert on the right there, which is you know, pretty much calling for help at the time, but it's too late at that point. Okay, so looking at the SSP incident last year, I'm sure all of you from the industry will know it or know about it and will have heard horror stories about it. But essentially, for those that don't, SSP Worldwide provide a broking platform on a software as a service basis, or SaaS. They are a big player in the industry and a big player worldwide. They boast 40% of the UK insurance market in 8 out of 10 of top insurers, and therefore any problem that they have will have a significant impact on that market. And that's exactly what happened last August. They had a catastrophic failure on the 26th of August, started out as a simple power outage that should have been catered very easily by the power resiliency within their data center, but that unfortunately failed as well, as they often do, because they're virtually never used and they're very rarely tested properly, and as a result you don't really know that they're going to work, and in this event it didn't. The power went on to the data center, the batteries and the generators didn't kick in, and thousands of computers were dropped without proper shutdowns, and that caused massive disruption within the storage network within the data center, with machines being physically damaged by the break-in power. That becomes a nightmare situation because you've got a data center with no power at all, no computers. The computers that are within there, some of them are damaged, some of them aren't. You don't know which are and which aren't. The first thing to do is to recover the power, and then you have to bring back the infrastructure within the data center itself. And once you've done that, then you can start recovering systems. And one computer has to be the first one to be switched on, and one has to be the last one to be switched on. And as you go through that, you'll work out what's working, what's not, and what needs to be replaced and what needs to be recovered. It is a complete nightmare situation for the provider, for the data center provider, if it's separate, but also for the customer, because the customer at the end, and this would be the insurance brokers in this case, had absolutely no idea of the scale of the problem or when it was going to be fixed, or indeed their priority within that. The situation ended up with very poor communication and complications, which led to changes in the recovery plan. So SSP started out with one plan to fix it and soon discovered that wasn't going to work. They wasted 4 or 5 days doing that, and they switched to recovering in a different data center, and effectively had to start from scratch again there. And that left their customers not only with an enormous outage, but also with no clear idea of when it was going to be fixed. And because of that, nobody could make any plans as to how they handled it. They simply had to do what they could manually and get on with it. Interestingly, halfway through the outage, the FCA sent a reminder out to brokers that they were still responsible for their compliance obligations, despite the fact that it was SSP's failure. So although these brokers had outsourced their platform to SSP, it was not SSP that were in trouble, it would be the brokers that would be in trouble for compliance issues. If you look in detail at the timeline of the incident, it's very interesting. I don't mean to go through all of these, but it started out with a very simple power outage on the 26th of August. And usually you would expect that to be handled immediately by the resilience of the data center. It wasn't. And effectively that meant about a 10 to 14 day outage for brokers with no IT broking ability and no ability to do new business and no ability to maintain business. And it wasn't until the 13th of September that most brokers got back their systems, and even then SSP admitted that the systems weren't completely back and not all brokers had their systems back. And systems that were back were slow and missing data. Throughout all of that, there was clearly very poor communication with customers, with broking customers from SSP, and that's quite understandable if you think about the chaos they were in. And there's obviously some motivation to not give out bad news before you know you really have to, but also they didn't know what to say. They were in the midst of having to fix the situation as they went. And even by the 15th of September, SSP had to admit that they were still fully weeks away from full restoration. It ended up with brokers in the background producing blogs and forums where they were discussing the problems and talking about how they could move away from SSP, but the reality was that they were stuck. They'd abdicated responsibility and they were stuck just waiting to see what SSP were going to do. And interestingly, because of the way that SSP had to switch their processing and build an almost completely new system on another data center, there were inherent weaknesses within that, and that re-manifested itself in November, where they had further outages. In these instances, they were just days and half days. Normally that would be considered significant, but obviously in the light of what had gone before, it was minor by comparison. The whole thing obviously cost brokers an enormous amount of money and an enormous amount of disruption, and clearly has cost SSP a lot of business as well. So what really went wrong? Well, at the root of it, SSP and their customers didn't take DR seriously enough. I suspect they were all motivated by saving money, and SSP didn't want to have expensive processing requirements for DR and could never justify that, and so had a plan which was clearly inadequate. It was complicated based on taking data backups to different locations and to the same location and to different locations, and they're rebuilding their systems from those backups. I suspect they never envisaged losing all their systems and having such a large amount of damage to their storage infrastructure. But the reality is that was created by such a simple thing as a break in the mains power. Their plan was clearly inadequate, complicated, and untested. Otherwise, they would have understood it was inadequate and complicated. I think it's also worth pointing out that SSP's customers were also guilty of not taking DR seriously enough. They clearly hadn't quizzed SSP closely enough about their DR and what it actually meant. They'd all probably had simple statements about the fact that systems could be brought up in another data center, but nobody had understood how that would be done and what the likely timescales would be in that circumstance. So they were also responsible for this situation, because people could have demanded better plans from SSP and used the power of the customer to get SSP to do a better job. The reality was that it was relatively simple problems that coincided to turn simple IT incident like power outage into a disaster of this magnitude. The fact that their plans were inadequate and had to be revised and changed as they went meant that complete chaos ensued. SSP were in chaos. When an organisation is in chaos, it's very difficult to make good decisions, and they had to change their plans on the hoof. And it meant that they couldn't be clear with their customers, with their broker community, about what they were doing, how long it was going to take, and therefore that chaos was extended to the broking community, where they couldn't plan in their businesses what to do for the best, how to recover, and how long the chaos was going to go on for. And obviously poor communication was inevitable in that circumstance. I think the other thing is brokers were completely unable to do anything for themselves. They couldn't turn elsewhere. They had no independent sources of system processing or data. So they just had to wait on SSP and pray they would fix it and fix it in a reasonable timescale. They didn't, and obviously the costs were enormous. Nobody in the industry appears to be prepared to quantify what their costs were, but clearly they were enormous, and it's going to be very difficult for brokers to get that back from SSP or anywhere else. The fact that SSP were forced into changing their platform from one data center to another and rebuilding it in a completely new one meant that there were weaknesses in that new build, which was done at great speed and great haste, where the only decision to make was whatever's the fastest, not the best, meant that there were inherent weaknesses which resurfaced later in November with more outages. What were the consequences for the brokers? Well, obviously direct loss of business. Many talked about not being able to do any new business for weeks. The reputational damage was enormous, but also they had potential FCA non-compliances, and worse still, individual end customers of the brokers had cover compromised. So there were probably people driving cars without insurance as a result. The enormous uncertainty and scale of the problem meant that the brokers were very limited in their ability to carry on business and make any plans whatsoever going forwards. And they had also no understanding of the level of priority that their individual business would have in the recovery. Would they be one of those first organizations to have their systems recovered, or would they be the last? And that's an interesting dynamic that data center providers and SaaS providers don't talk about. But the reality is, when you lose an entire platform, one computer has to be the first to be switched back on, and one computer will be the last to be switched back on or fixed. And the systems that run on those and the customers that get those services have to be decided according to priority. And those are very difficult to understand, because no service provider will ever tell you what their priority is. It'll often be to do with what's the easiest to recover first. It can also be what's going to have the highest SLA penalty breaches associated with it. But having short breach SLAs is not always the best thing, because if you think about it, if you have already breached your SLA and the company is going to have to pay you money, they might as well move on to those customers who aren't in breach yet and try and recover them. So actually having the hardest SLA breaches may not get you to the top of the list. The whole incident obviously had managed cost and repercussions, and brokers had to, once they got their systems back, start working through recovering the backlog of work, and that took weeks and weeks and weeks. Many brokers are quoted on the internet as having to pay staff overtime, work weekends, work evenings, and to try and catch up, and obviously caused enormous cost of recovering that backlog. They still had uncertainty over SSP's reliability 2 months after the incident, and they had no ability to move elsewhere. And really worrying, no independent copy of data. If SSP had corrupted that data or lost it entirely, the brokers would have had no independent way of getting back to that data. And that, I think, is a strategic worry for any business. Okay, so what would be a better approach to have taken? Well, most obviously, everybody should have taken their DR obligations much, much more seriously. And that's at all levels within the organizations. And that's not just within SSP, but within their customers as well. Their brokers and the executives within the brokers should have taken the requirement for recovering DR systems and how they would be recovered much more seriously, and quizzed SSP much harder, and SSP would have been forced to take that more seriously and done a better job. How do you go about doing that? Essentially, you must establish your needs thoroughly, establish your risk appetite, establish your compliance needs through careful examination of the requirements, do a gap analysis against what you need to deliver and where you are currently, and then produce a plan to meet those requirements. I think also, obviously, a lot of this is applicable for people who run their own systems and people who outsource systems. The reality of today is most of us do a bit of both. We both run a bit of our own and we both outsource bits to platforms. But you must look at the DR requirements of your entire processing systems and extend that beyond your own organization to cloud providers and platform providers. And when looking at DR, people should focus on how do I get back to a normal service. So lots of DR provisions are focused on how do I recover the computers, how do I recover the data center. But you really need to go end to end. How do I get customers connected? How do I get my people connected back to the new solution? And how long is that going to take? Is it timely? Is it simple? Will it meet the requirements that I've established that I have for my risk appetite and my compliance requirements? And you should consider very strongly the strategic advantages of having an independent supplier of your recovery solution over putting everything with the one supplier, whether that's yourself in terms of running your own systems, or whether that's a platform provider who's outsourced. So pulling that into a bit more detail, there are 3 really strong best practices pillars for thinking about how you plan for mitigating risk for IT. And the first thing is to have a simple plan. Have a simple plan because if it's simple and it has certain recovery outcomes, then you're much more likely to be able to execute it well and successfully. Test everything as a way of controlling fundamentally, does that plan work? Test it at the beginning, test it periodically, and use testing as a fundamental control of are you meeting your risk requirements. And keep updating the plan. Obviously, this is symbiotic, because if you have a simple plan, it's easier to test that plan. And if it's easier to test that plan, you can understand what the changes are that you need to make, and therefore it's easier to update. And if it's simple, it's much more easier to update and keep it relevant. Let's pull that out a little bit and first look at that first line of a simple, certain plan. don't start by assuming everything will work. That's the way that a lot of people think, because they want to be optimistic about what they'll achieve in the event of an outage. And obviously, if you can be optimistic, it's more likely to be cheaper. But don't trust other people's definition of adequate. Clearly, brokers trusted SSP with what was adequate, and didn't look very hard at it and take their own view and guard themselves. So think about your own systems. Think about, is what the IT team telling you about how they can recover, is it sensible? And have the board given the IT team enough backing to make that provision adequate, and have your suppliers' provisions being looked at, and are they adequate? Focus on that return to service. As I say, lots of people focus on definitions of recovery point and recovery time, and lots of people define those in different ways. Focus on the very simple thing of, how long will it be before my users can start using the service again and helping our customers? It's an obvious thing, but aim for as much certainty as possible. If you can get things which you definitely know will work, are simple, this will be completely empowering to an organization, because they can make certain decisions. For instance, if you know you have a DR provision that can kick in and work in 2 hours, and you've got an outage, you can afford to try and recover the IT systems, the live IT systems, for an hour or two, but say to your board, whatever happens, I'm going to try to recover the current systems over the next 2 hours, but if I can't, then I'll invoke the DR solution. So whatever happens, we will have processing back within 4 hours. You can be definitive about it, and you can decide exactly what you're going to do. The business people can get on and work out how they handle the business and what they're going to do to prepare for when that processing comes back. And that is very empowering. Keep recovery plans as simple as possible. So it's the old keep it simple, stupid approach. Again, very straightforward. So if you can have provisions which are straightforward and are going to give you certain outcomes, they create simple plans. Simplicity is helped by automation, as much automation as possible, so that there's very little to be done manually, there's very little to be looked up, there's very little to be worked out at the time. And aim for a quick recovery. Quick recovery of communication systems particularly enable you to be much more decisive and effective, and critically, you can be more effective within your own organization, and you can be more effective with your customers and stakeholders. And obviously the last one is, remember, Murphy's Law will be operating, and have some way of getting skilled available support to help you if things go wrong in a way that you don't expect. So moving on to testing, prioritize testing as a fundamental control. It's the only way you know that things will work, and if you haven't tested them, you don't really have a right to expect them to definitely work in circumstances you don't expect. The other thing about testing is, if you do good testing, because we can all think of ways of testing things that don't actually stretch whatever provision it is we're putting in place, but if you do good, reaching, representative testing, you'll not only work out what isn't working, but you'll uncover unknown issues that you hadn't even thought of. So things will come up that you hadn't even thought you needed to think about. And obviously, it goes without saying, to be good, to be a good representative test, it should be realistic and it should be ongoing. It should be done periodically to make sure that you are revalidating that everything's working. The fact that IT systems have a high amount of change means that testing should be done regularly in particular. And it's usually what is often called configuration drift within IT systems, which undoes good DR plans. They were good plans at the time, but over time things have changed. People who've changed and haven't thought about the implications for DR, and the whole thing is no longer representative and will no longer meet the needs of the organisation. And if you do a recovery test, they obviously should be realistic. They should be end-to-end recoveries, so not just checking this bit or that bit, but you should do a full representative test which ends up with users actually on systems finding out whether they work or not. And they shouldn't be limited to simply can you boot a virtual machine or even boot a physical machine, because that's really a low bar by comparison to the complexities of getting service back to users. When you do exercise tests, when you do DR tests, recovery tests, exercise realistic scenarios. There's always a tendency to want to do the easy scenarios and limit yourself to the easy ones. But do think about all the scenarios and do make sure you're exercising all of them in a reasonable timescale. We do surveys all the time because testing is so important to Plan B, and we think it's a real competitive advantage of Plan B. We talk to our customers about testing, and we talk to prospects about testing. And although here it says 63% of companies only 63% were able to confirm that DR tests were successful in surveys we've carried out, I think that's flattering, and I suspect in reality that's a high number compared to those who consider that their DR tests really show that they can recover in a reasonable timescale. Okay, and the last pillar of good practice, keeping things up to date. Obviously, because production IT systems change so quickly, when they change, they can easily break a DR plan. A simple example is if not all systems are covered by the DR provision, just the really critical ones, but someone moves a service from a critical machine to another machine for good, maybe IT performance reasons, they don't think about the fact that the new machine is not covered by the DR provision. They simply break the DR plan instantly. Everything's working, nothing's broken, but the plan is broken, and that would prevent a successful recovery. So IT system changes happen all the time, so the plan can be out of date before the ink is dry. And so as production changes are made, you need to consider the DR implications of that and reflect that in the DR plan as you go. And remembering, coming back to our original points about keeping things simple, obviously if the plans are simple and the provisions are comprehensive and effective, it's much, much easier and more simple to keep that plan up to date and effective. And the other thing I was going to say was that IT changes can affect individual systems, but more importantly, they can affect associated or dependent systems. So a change to a system which appears not to affect that system at all can be catastrophic for other services and other systems that are not being considered. And I talked earlier about an example of where a DR provision perhaps only covers critical systems. That obviously makes things much more difficult within a DR plan, because you've got to remember every change that can affect those critical systems, even if they're not being made to systems that are thought normally to be in the core of your processing requirements. It's very easy to make changes in live and not realize they'll have a significant effect on the DR capability. So strong change management is order of the day. And considering the effects of DR should be a routine part of any change management within the IT team, but also within the broader business team, because obviously lots of things can affect IT availability, and use representative testing to catch those changes that haven't been adequately catered for. Okay, so broadly, how can a better approach help from Plan B? We believe we're unique in the industry in taking a holistic approach to DR, where we look at the whole thing, we look at outcomes, and we use testing as an absolute fundamental control. So we are a specialist. We do understand the requirements, and we do understand how to make these things effective. We're independent, which means it's all we do. If you outsource to us, we will make sure it happens, and we're clear about only having that as a priority. We don't have other things to do. We provide services to individual organizations directly for their internal IT, but equally we provide services not only to customers who have outsourced hosting, but also customers who use SaaS platforms where we provide recovery solutions for their individual part of that SaaS platform. Equally, I should say, we provide services to SaaS providers directly who outsource their DR to us as a way of being able to maintain a service to their customers. And if SSP had done something similar, if they had actual copies of systems ready to go, then they didn't necessarily have to be up and running and expensive in that sense, but they should have had full system copies that could have been simply restarted in the new data center. They didn't bother with that. They went for the much cheaper alternative of data backups, and the difficulty of their recovery was evident as a result. I should say that Plan B provide a range of services. So that goes from consultancy offerings through to DR services, both mostly managed and tested, but we do other services as well, particularly where we're blending solutions. But all our services are aimed at preventing IT incidents becoming disasters. So we like to think of ourselves not as disaster recovery providers, but as people who avoid disasters for our customers. You can't help an IT incident happening, it's inevitable, but the way you handle it and the way you have prepared for it will definitely be an absolute judge of your business and of the damage that incident causes. We use automated solution testing as a fundamental part of all of our services. So all Plan B core managed services are tested every day. So we test entire system solutions every day. So we bring up everything within every computer within a solution and test it automatically, and all testing is checked daily by our engineers if there are any issues. And that's a fundamental part of our service and our approach. We also believe in as much automation as possible. So if we automate things, it's easy for us, it's easy for you, not only on a daily basis, but come the day of a problem, if we can just press a button and systems will recover automatically and be configured and made available to customers, and networks are made available, that makes everything much more simple for us. More importantly, we're much more likely to execute that successfully and deliver working systems very easily to our customers. And if SSP had had anything like that, then they would have had nowhere near as much damage as they actually had. And we believe in managing solutions on behalf of our customers for best outcomes, and that's what we really focus on, that best outcome. Okay, we're getting towards the end now. What are the benefits of taking that managed, tested, best outcome sorts of approach? Well, you get a guaranteed solution recovery. I mean, incidentally, Plan B will guarantee recoveries. We will guarantee recoveries to be available for users to use and log on to within a specific number of minutes, and we'll put significant financial penalties behind that to prove that they're not just simply empty SLAs. If you take that approach, you will get simplicity, and you'll get simplicity in terms of setting up the service, simplicity in terms of managing it on an ongoing basis, and in building the wider continuity plans around that. There's no reason they can't be cost effective and tailored to exactly the requirements of an individual business. That doesn't mean to say it has to be an expensive, cover everything to the ultimate. You can have a tiered approach, but it is still going to meet your risk requirements and be relatively straightforward in testing and proving that. And and obviously that all leads to minimum downtime and minimum business disruption and obviously minimum cost. The independence strategically is really important. We believe what we do for our customers is we give them control. So they might have outsourced their processing somewhere else, or they might have their own team running things, but they have an independent source of data and an independent source of support and system delivery from us when everything goes wrong. So they're not dependent on the team that are trying to recover the live systems to produce the DR solution. And that is, we think, fundamentally a strategic advantage. It all ends up with you, if you've got a provision like this, being able to handle the situation you're in, handle the disaster, rather than being subject to it. If you think of the SSP situation, all those brokers were completely subject to the disaster. They could do nothing but wait and hope that it would get sorted out by SSP. They had no ability to do anything to help themselves, bar manually process things in the background. And so this approach is strategically more important and allows you to put you in control and protect you from that damage that ensues. We also believe that we're able to provide, as an independent specialist, calm, clear technical leadership and advice at the time when you or your suppliers may not be thinking clearly. Okay, so we've gone over quite a lot, and I wanted to just do a quick summary and then think about any questions that anybody has. To think about DR, you need to take it seriously. That doesn't mean to say it needs to be expensive. But you do need to look seriously at your requirement. So that is not only your risk requirement of your individual business and what that means in terms of your IT recovery needs, but also any contractual or compliance requirements for your industry or your individual customer contracts. And that should be taken seriously at all levels within the organization. So it's no point in an IT team taking that seriously if they're not backed up by the executives with the budget and the commitment to make those work. If you don't do that, costs could be catastrophic, and we firmly believe that in the SSP situation, they have been catastrophic for SSP, and more importantly, they've been catastrophic for the broking customers of SSP. Backup is not normally an adequate DR provision for operational systems. So having a backup and an idea that you will build back from it is not a quick and easy thing to do. It's not a certain thing to do, and it's clearly wasn't good enough for SSP, and it's not normally good enough for core operational systems. That's not to say you could do it for lesser systems, but not normally for core operational systems. Don't ever assume an IT supplier's DR systems will be adequate. Audit them. Ask about SaaS escrow services. Plan B provides escrow services to SaaS providers, or an escrow equivalent service where we do DR against platforms or against individual customers' instances to make sure that they can independently get working systems back again. If we'd have had any of SSP's customers, then we could have allowed them to carry on working independently of SSP and got them back working the same day, not weeks and weeks later. Aim for as much certainty as possible. If you're producing a DR provision, the more certainty you have, the more simple it will be, and the more likely it is that you can execute that successfully. So obviously aim for a quick recovery, because quick recoveries put you in control and allow you to be decisive and effective. And simplicity. Get simplicity in the plan, get simplicity by automating and by aiming for certain outcomes, and prioritize testing as an absolute fundamental control. So that's testing at all levels. Regular testing of the IT solution and periodic testing of implementing that solution and seeing, does it work, have things changed, do we need to think of other things? And last, obviously for Plan B, strongly consider outsourcing for independent provision of your DR services. We believe that strategically puts customers in a much stronger position. Okay, so that's all I really wanted to say, and I just wondered if anybody had any questions. I'm just going to have a quick look at the chat forum and see what we've got. Okay, so we've got a couple of questions on the chat forum that have come through. In terms of getting commitment to DR, what services Plan B provide? I guess it depends on what level you're thinking about. We can obviously come in and look at an individual IT requirement and produce a plan for a DR service at a technical level. We do that all the time for customers who are clear about their requirements. I think equally, we have customers who are not clear about their requirements, and specifically, we've got a customer at the moment who is FCA regulated. They're not in the insurance industry, but they're FCA regulated, and for them, we are doing an analysis of their needs. So we're looking at a broad level for what the company's risk appetite is and what that means in terms of recovering their IT systems, but also we're looking in detail at the FCA requirements for that particular organization, and we're doing gap analysis against those requirements and where they are, and out of that we're producing yes, a technical plan and a technical provision and service, but also a wider business continuity plan that goes with that, and that will extend beyond the IT services that Plan B run for DR. So we can help with all of that. If it's simply an IT requirement, then obviously we can come in and look quickly at that. It just depends on what level you want to do, but we're very happy to help at all levels. Equally, there are independent business continuity and DR consultants that you can go to who can do very similar work for you, and it's just a matter of working out what you'd like to do. Whilst obviously we'd love you to buy from Plan B, we think independence is a very good thing. And someone's asked to talk a little bit about independent provision of DR on SaaS platforms. I do want to stress that a lot of what I've talked about today is entirely applicable to businesses running their own systems, but obviously because of the example we've used for SSP, there are implications for SaaS providers, and I think clearly with SaaS providers, individual companies have outsourced their processing to SaaS providers and assumed that DR will be catered for. And I think by going through what we've seen today, that's clearly a mistake, and you must ask your SaaS providers about their DR provisions. You must independently assess them and work out whether they are going to be good enough for you. Do they give you enough certainty, enough simplicity, and will they get your systems back quickly enough in the event of a recovery? Can you trust that organization to be able to do what they very blandly say they can do? And the only real way to do that is to audit them and to ask them to test. We're talking with an insurance company recently who, as a result of the SSP incident, now have regular audits and recovery tests with their SaaS provider, with their platform provider, who incidentally isn't SSP in this instance, but and that's a very good approach. What can Plan B do? we do offer what we call an escrow service. I mean, escrow is always thought of in the traditional way as being some independent organisation holding a copy of source code for a system should a software provider go bust. Well, in the terms of cloud platform providers, of course, having the source code doesn't really help you, because that doesn't allow you to run anything. It allows you to go on developing the platform that you've bought. But in the terms of a cloud platform, what you really need is to get processing systems back again. So in our case, what we do is we offer a service where we will take a copy of the individual customer's instance from a platform provider, and we will back that up. We will test every day, and we will be prepared to run it at a moment's notice for that customer should the platform either break, as it did with SSP, or should that platform provider go bankrupt. And there was a shock in the industry a few years ago when a hosting provider went bankrupt, and the administrator stepped in and threatened to shut down the data center immediately with no ability for anybody to get their systems out or get copies of their data. So if you're interested in that, we'd be delighted to talk to you about that. And equally, we do provide that service to platform providers as a whole. So we have a number of platforms that we actually protect the entire platform for. Okay, I've got one other question. What recovery points are available from Plan B? That's a fairly detailed question, but when you think about recovery point, it's one of the bits of jargon that's used in the industry. It usually refers to how much data loss you are going to suffer in the event of your systems being recovered. So, and that really goes down to how often do you take copies of the live systems. Plan B offers a number of different service levels for this. We can, but our two basic levels are either a continuous copy, so that means we're taking copies every few seconds of live systems, and we can bring those systems back immediately with virtually zero data loss. It is important to understand how that works, because there can be circumstances where that can be compromised, but the effect is you can recover systems with virtually zero data loss, and obviously the implications of moving over to the recovered systems if you have zero data loss are a lot lower than if you're going to look at losing, say, a day's worth of data. So Plan B can offer continuous data replication services, and we also have ones that work on a daily basis. So you can, sometimes we blend those where some systems are done on a continuous basis and some systems are done on a daily basis. They can all be tested together as one solution, and whether it's our continuous services or it's our daily services, we still test them every day to ensure that they're working, and that obviously brings massive benefit. Okay, I've just got another question. If we outsource IT, how can we make sure that they can support the DR SLA? Is there a questionnaire or something we can ask? I think yes, absolutely. There's guidance from the FCA on outsourcing your IT to cloud providers and what you should consider within that. I think you should start by just asking that question of your platform provider. So what is their SLA? What do they say they can achieve? I believe in SSP's case, they made statements within sort of bland statements about, oh, we run in 2 centers and systems can be bought up in another center. But they didn't ever specify exactly how that was done or how long that would take. And so it's really important that you get into the nitty-gritty of that. And we can sort of help you with things that you can ask specifically of platform providers that will get to the root of that. So if you're interested in that, then we can we can help you with a list of things to ask from your platform provider. And equally, we can probably do that for you if you're interested in a Plan B service. Okay, I think that is the last question. Yeah, no, there's no more. So I think I've covered all of those within what we've said. So I think that just leaves me to say thank you to everybody who's joined. I'm sorry we had a bit of hiatus at the beginning and had to stop and start, but I hope that's been useful to everybody. And if you are interested in talking to Plan B, then do get in touch with us. You can contact us at info@planb.co.uk, or indeed just call us in the office and talk to us about your requirements. We'd be delighted to talk through either pure consultancy or for a specific service, and even look at requirements going into the future. So if we can be of help, do please don't hesitate to get in contact. Thank you again, and look forward to talking to you in the future.